Oh, you've been surprised. Or have you? Greetings and welcome back to another dashing and daring, exciting and caring episode of the Vodkast. I'm your host as always, DMJ, and what I want to talk about today is very important. It's the rule for the surprise round. Now, it is very vague in the player's handbook. There has been some errata, is that what it's called? That's been added on. It's been tacked on so that you'll be able to know the actual official rules, supposedly, but it's still a little shady if you ask me. A lot of what you're going to hear today is from an article in 2008 by a Michael Shea. He wrote this, and there are parts of it that I really appreciate that he wrote, and well, I appreciate that he wrote the article, but there are parts that I agree with, and there are definitely parts that I don't agree with. One of the major things that I don't agree with is passive perception being used to be able to detect a hidden character. Now, if you're walking through the forest, you're hearing things. You're hearing birds. You're hearing a branch snap. You're hearing this, that, and the other. Your passive perception is definitely picking up on all that. Perhaps maybe if you're actively searching, you're going to discover that right after that branch snap, you also heard a guttural, sound coming out of something. You know that there's something there. But the way that surprise is written now, let me read you the rules first, and then we'll get into it. So here it is. Rules is written. The rules themselves describes the surprise as follows. The DM determines who might be surprised. If neither side tries to be stealthy, they automatically notice each other. Otherwise, the DM compares the dexterity stealth checks of anyone hiding with the passive wisdom perception score of each creature on the opposing side. Any character or monster that doesn't notice the threat is surprised at the start of the encounter. Now, let's pause there for just a moment because this is the part that gets a little shady. Now, when they're talking about threats, are they talking about any threat, or are they talking about all threats? Because the way I see it, passive perception, I don't think an active hiding character should have to oppose the other character's role. Like, there's no role. It's a perception. And some characters, like I have a thief in my game who has a passive perception of something like 17 or something insane like that, which makes like him going through a dungeon or trying to find secret doors almost impossible to hide from him. So in my games, I like to house rule that, and I don't like to use passive perception on hiding checks. It just doesn't make sense. It's not fair, especially if you're opposing a character. Yeah, you might say that, yes, that character has worked hard to get that score that they've received. But sometimes when you're playing a game and that element comes into play, especially as a dungeon master, you want the characters to enjoy this encounter that you prepared for them. And you don't want one character to always be like, there's a secret door, there's a trap there, there's this or there. Just being able to use their active passive perception. Now, if you are surprised, you can't move or take an action on your first turn of combat, and you can't take a reaction until that turn ends. A member of the group can be surprised even if other members aren't. That's where things get a little shady too. It's like if you're coming down a hallway and you've got, let's say, well, let me give you an example here. Okay, let's say we have a party of three: Johnny Paladin, Elroy the Wizard, and Tizero the Drow Rogue. The party is aware that there are several goblins approaching from the north corridor of the ruins that they've been exploring. Each of the characters are going to try to hide and make a stealth check. Johnny rolls a 2 and is not stealthy. Elroy rolls a 10, and the goblin's passive perception is a 9. So he ekes by, and of course Tizero rolls a 23 and is invisible to the goblins. So, based on the player's handbook, it doesn't indicate whether a not surprised character does or doesn't have the surprised condition affecting them if any threat is detected. If you're a cruel DM, you can crush your players' hopes and allow the goblins to not be surprised. However, I would still allow the stealthy Tizero to remain unseen. And that is how I handle the aspect of surprise in my game. I also don't consider the surprise round to be considered the first round of combat. I just read that off of something that I'd written the other day. But that is in my head. When there's a surprise encounter in my game, it is a planned surprise encounter if it's coming from me. If the dungeon master has an encounter set to go, these goblins are hidden here and there about the ruins, then that is a set surprise encounter. That initiative doesn't take place until that surprise round goes into effect. So when the party comes across this group of goblins, whether they know them, that whether they know that they're there or not. Whether they know that they're there or not. That's kind of fun to say. Say it with me 3 times. Whether we know that they're or not. Whether they know that they're or not. Whether they know that they're or not. Okay, let's get back to it. It doesn't seem fair to me that if the group of goblins that are hiding, all in different locations, different conditions, perhaps some of them suck, some of them good, you're not going to want to roll for every single one of them. And that's where I think the passive perception comes in. In this case, they have a +6 to stealth, which would allow them to, get a little bit of a bonus. So I would usually do it in groups. Maybe there's a group to the left, center, and right, and I just consider it that way. That way, if Joey the Goblin over here sneezes and gives away his friend too, then the party will be like, hey, there they are, and they get it. The surprise is broken. However, if the other 2 parties roll well, this party is going towards the ones that were detected. The other 2 now are going to have such advantage on their attacks because they're completely unseen, unheard, and who knows what's going to happen next. So after that surprise round ends, after that surprise is over, it's all said and done. At that point, that's when I have everyone roll initiative. That surprise is the encounter. It's not a part of the combat that's about to take place. After the surprise has been blown, then at that point, one way or another, then initiative is going to take place. So that's just how I deal with it in my game. But as the official roles go, I think it pretty much is now better explained with the errata that they added. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay, so this comes directly from the article, but what happens if you're surprised by one creature and not another? The rules don't say, but the official Sage Advice Compendium does. And here's the relevant passage from page 9. You can be surprised even if your companions aren't, and you aren't surprised even if one of your foes fails to catch you unaware. That kind of clears things up a little bit. I mean, not exactly, not everything is cleared up with that, but surprise is just generally been kind of confusing in my games. And I have to give credit where credit's due. My dungeon master, Michael Decker, recommended I do this video because we ran into a situation in our last game where surprise came into play, and we were all looking at each other, wondering, well, are we all surprised? Are none of us surprised? Is he surprised? She surprised? And I just don't like the way it works when a whole group's surprise is blown if stealthy Tizero is in the shadows and clearly not part of the party. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that passive perception detecting these characters over here also detects this character hidden in the shadows over here. So that's generally how I handle surprise in my game. Let me give you a few more examples of real world situations in my game that I came across and how I dealt with them. So, for example, the characters in my game were trying to take refuge from a sandstorm in the blazing hot deserts of Alatia. In doing so, they discovered the only standing ruins that might protect them were about a mile off, and they raced forward to escape from the coming storm. Upon arrival, there were 2 Orthon that were positioned in the balconies and invisible. The trap had been sprung, and due to the conditions, the Orthon each got 1 action before initiative. That is a situation that is very specifically and very conditional. Conditional is the key word when it comes to surprise in my game. What are the conditions? Have I prepared the conditions properly so that they should surprise the party? Have the party prepared their conditions so that they successfully surprise the goblins that are coming down the hall? That's all what it comes down to. Also, there could be distractions. Like in this case, there was a huge sandstorm blowing in, very deadly in the deserts of Alatia. So they had to find refuge somewhere. And the most obvious choice was right there, the pyramid ruins. Obviously, it was a trap that I'd already set up for them. The big bad guy, Alistair, who is out to get them and stop them from doing what they're about to do. They're trying to find a sword. It's called Rillis. It's actually a wizard. An old wizard got transferred his soul into the sword. Now he's trapped in the sword. But he has the ability to break the soul stone, which is where Alistair's actual, being is. It doesn't matter. Anywho, this condition here was there was a huge sandstorm. They weren't really looking for trouble in the pyramid. They just needed to get away from the storm. So that condition that was placed upon them forced their hand a little bit, which gave me, I think, as a DM, the right to surprise them in that case. In this next scenario, this is where my grouping and doing checks applies here. So let's say that there are 14 goblins and they're preparing a trap for the party. They're well aware of and have been tracking the party ever since they arrived in Murkmire Swamp. We're not going to roll 14 stealth checks because one of the goblins is going to fuck the dog for sure. So we're also not going to roll one group stealth check or use their passive or anything like that. So what I said before comes into play here, where you've got 3 groups of goblins and, because they're all kind of grouped together in these little hidden alcoves, you know, it gives you that opportunity to say, okay, if one of these guys fucks up, then, you know, these guys have been seen, but if these guys are still well hidden, then they shouldn't be affected. So I'm kind of getting repetitive here. Before we find ourselves just repeating ourselves, I'm going to let you guys go. But like I said, that's how I handle surprise in my games. It doesn't have to be how you handle surprise in your games. It's one of those things that, because it's so blurry, as a DM, I think that's where, like, you know, your skills, your knowledge, your years of running games come into play. Like, you can make the rule on the fly there. You are the master of dungeons. You are the one that's making all the rules for the game. And so if the party says, well, you know, one of us got surprised, but, you know, the rest of us shouldn't. If you want to, in your game, say, no, you blew the surprise. So that's how you can handle it. However, in my games, I like to give the advantage to the party whenever I can, because I enjoy running the game and I enjoy learning about these characters and seeing where that their, you know, their history takes them. Did they become heroes? Did they become villains? You know, what titles do they acquire? Who did they become? It's so fun to read someone's backstory and take them through, you know, 14, 15 levels of play and see where they are at that point and see how close things are matched up. It's fun. I love being a dungeon master, and I hope you guys are loving the content I'm creating as much as I love creating the content that you guys are watching. If you are, would you please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, and hitting that little bell icon, because it'll let you know every time I put out a new video. Don't forget to make somebody smile today and make yourself a better person tomorrow than you were today tomorrow. Let's make the world spin a little bit happier and a little bit nerdier. All together as one, in the sun and in the rain, dancing and singing, my brothers and sisters. Live life to the fullest and love every moment of it, because you just never know when that last moment's going to come for you. However, never live in fear of that moment. Always live in love. And never let your inner child die. Ooh-wee. Take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and take care of those around you who cannot take care of themselves, for they are the ones that need it the most. And if no one has told you today that they love you, the Vodkast loves you very much, just the way you are. All right, guys, do no harm. I'm Geycen Oliveira. This is the Vodkast does Dungeons and Dragons. I'll catch you guys a little bit further on down the road to 50. Take care, my friends, and happy adventuring.
Don't go to sleep with a catch it in your pocket.